Lynn said. Money.
Rowley Claude nodded in agreement.
He was a big, stocky young man with red skin, contemplative blue eyes, and very blonde hair.
His manner had a deliberate slowness that seemed more intentional than natural.
He used second thoughts where others would use quick wits. He said, Yes, it seems money is behind everything these days. But I thought the farmers' business thrived during the war? Yes, but that doesn't mean good times will last. Within a year, we'll be back to where we started,
with rising wages,
unwilling workers,
and nobody knowing their place.
That is,
of course, unless your farming is truly on a large scale.
Old Forden knew that. At this point, he was ready to intervene. Lynn asked, And now? Now Mrs.
Gordon goes to London and spends £2,000 on a beautiful fur coat.
That's quite a villainous act. Not really.
Then he paused and said,
I would like to buy you a fur coat as well. Lynn, what does it look like, Rowley? She wanted an opinion on the woman from someone of her age. You'll see her tonight, at Uncle Lionel and Auntie Connie's party. Yes, I know that, but I want your opinion.
My mother says she's half-witted.
What do you think? Rowley thought for a moment and then said, Well, I don't think intelligence is her strongest feature, but she does seem superficially only to be a bit naive, with a somewhat simple demeanor. So she's really not very sophisticated?
Rowley shrugged and said, Not in the sense you mean.
She has beautiful eyes and a lovely complexion.
I suppose that's what made old Gordon fall in love with her,
along with the impression she gives of being simple and naive. I don't think that's pretense,
though she does seem to limit herself to being rather silly,
letting David take the lead. David? That's her brother. I don't think he's left any avenue of reckless and opportunistic behavior unexplored, and he doesn't like any of it much.
Lynn said sharply,
And why should he?
Then she added, with some surprise when he looked at her,
I mean, you don't like him either. Rowley responded coolly, I certainly don't, and neither will you. He's not someone you should like. You don't know who I like and who I don't. Rowley, I've seen a lot of the world in the last 3 years, and I think my perceptions have broadened.
You've seen more of the world than you've seen of its people.
That's true. He said this calmly,
but Lynn looked at him sharply.
Behind that flat calmness, there was something else.
She met his gaze directly,
his face revealing no emotion.
Lynn remembered that it had never been easy to know exactly what Rowley was thinking.
She thought, what a strange world, turned upside down.
It has become customary for men to go to war,
and women to stay home.
But this situation was reversed. One of the young men, Rowley and Johnny, had to stay on the farm.
They drew lots, and Johnny Farvisor was the one who was drafted to go to war,
and was almost immediately killed in action.
Throughout the war, Rowley had stayed only a mile or two from home, while she, Lynn, had gone to Egypt, North Africa, and Sicily, faced enemy fire more than once,
and now Lynn was back from the war.
And Rowley was at home,
and suddenly she wondered if he had cared.
She gave a small, nervous laugh and said, Sometimes things seem a little turned around, don't they? Or maybe not. Then she looked out at the extending countryside and added, Perhaps. She hesitated for a moment and then said, Rowley, did you care, I mean about Johnny?
He stared at her with a coldness that surprised her and said,
Leave Johnny out of it. The war is over and you were lucky. Do you mean lucky that you? She hesitated. Lucky you didn't have to go? Well, yes, don't you think that's fortunate?
She wasn't quite sure how to interpret that question. His voice was blunt and his statements ended definitively.
She added with a smile, But of course, the servicewomen had difficulty settling back home. She said, annoyed, Don't be silly, Rowley. But why was she annoyed? Had his words struck a chord? Well, I think it's best to consider our marriage unless you've changed your mind. Of course I haven't changed my mind, why would I? He said with some ambiguity, God knows, I hope you haven't changed your opinion? Not specifically, perhaps you've changed yours? No, I haven't changed. Here on the farm, little changes happen as you know. Lynn said,
feeling somewhat that the conversation had come to a trivial conclusion after being so charged.
Well then, let's marry as you wish. In June or so? Yes. He wasn't swayed by emotions.
Then the two fell silent.
The issue was settled,
and Lynn felt,
despite herself,
a profound heaviness in her chest.
Yet Rowley had not changed.
but remained as he always had, unemotional and inclined to downplay things and give them less importance than they deserved. They had always loved each other, and had never talked much about their love.
Why should they discuss it now? They would marry in June, live in Long Willows,
or whatever name she had always liked,
and she would never travel again. That is,
she wouldn't travel in the sense that the word now meant to her. No more excitement when the ship's engines started,
when the crew ran to their places, the fear as a plane took off and flew over the land, watching foreign shores take shape and smell of warm earth, paraffin, and garlic, the clamor of foreign languages,
and the western flowers and poppies standing proudly in a dusty garden.
All that was over. The war was finished,
and Lynn was back home. The steam had returned to her home
from the sea,
but she thought to herself, I am not the same Lynn who left in the first place. She looked up to see Rowley watching her,